Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Praveen, Manager Market Access and Advocacy, SAT India. On behalf of SAT and AVO Alliance, we welcome you to this live webinar series on advances in casting and splinting. A quick introduction about SAT and AVO Alliance. SAT is a global hygiene and health company headquartered at Stockholm, Sweden, and has presence in over 150 countries. AVO Alliance is a developmental non-profit organization dedicated to improving the care of the injured in low and middle income countries. This is the 7th program and incidentally the last one in the series of webinars on advances in casting and splinting. And in today's program, we are going to discuss about challenges and tips in the management of clubfoot and developmental dysplasia of hip. I would like to introduce the faculty for this session. I welcome Dr. Amit Nimade, who is currently Assistant Professor of Orthopedics at NKP Salve Institute of Medical Sciences and Lata Mangeshkar Hospital, Nagpur. I would also like to welcome Dr. Matthew Varghese, who is currently Head of the Orthopedics Department at St. Stephen's Hospital, New Delhi. Dr. Varghese has been pioneering the clubfoot management in India. He is also the Honorable Medical Director of Cure International India and also trained more than 4,000 healthcare professionals in the Ponseti method of clubfoot management. We are also privileged to have a very senior and highly experienced pediatric orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Thedis Longo, who is currently a senior consultant at Pediatric Trauma and Orthopedics at University Children's Hospital, Bern, Switzerland. We welcome you, Dr. Longo. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Sunil Vijayasinghe, who is a consultant orthopedic surgeon at Lady Rajewich Hospital for Children, Colombo. Now, in this session, it would begin with Dr. Nimade's session on challenges and tips in the clubfoot management. That would be followed by Dr. Varghese's presentation on how he would share the management of clubfoot in older children. The third session would be again by Dr. Nimade, who would talk about the management of DDH, challenges and tips. And the fourth presentation would be Dr. Slongo, who would share his clinical experience in the management of DDH in younger children. Thereafter, we would open the session to comments from the panelists, who can also share their clinical experiences. And the last segment would be the Q&A session, where all the questions from the participants would be addressed by the faculty. So I would request all the participants to post their questions in the box below the screen, and all those questions will be addressed during this session. With this, I would now hand it over to Dr. Amit Nimade to start the session. Over to you, Dr. Nimade.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank SCT for bringing up this webinar series on important aspect of clubfoot and DDH. And I will also welcome our panelists. And it is an honor for all of us that we have Dr. Slongo and Dr. Matthew Varghese and Dr. Sunil also from Sri Lanka. So all of them have Dr. Varghese and Dr. Slongo has more than 4 decades of experience in pediatric orthopedics, and Dr. Sunil has more than 2 decades. So we are talking of almost more than 100 years of pediatric orthopedic experiences today. So without taking much of the time, let's move on to the first topic, that is management of clubfoot, challenges and tips. So clubfoot is quite a common problem even in India. The incidence is almost around 1 per 1,000 live births, which accounts to almost 30 to 50,000 clubfoots born every year. It can present in various forms, various spectrum, various severity, and combination of various deformities as well, including the hip, knee, or it can even be syndromic associated with other skeletal anomalies. And we all know Ponseti technique and French technique are one of the gold standard methods of treatment, Ponseti being more commonly used, but it also depends upon what region you belong to and what is convenient to your patients. Ponseti technique was introduced almost 50 years ago, and it was said by Ponseti himself that the article was not well read and understood, which led to delayed acceptance of the technique. And now we all know that Ponseti technique is accepted almost worldwide and practiced not even only in the younger ones but also in late presentations, and the results are equally good in long term. Now I would like to stress on 2 basic important aspects of Ponseti technique, that is the fulcrum. So here the fulcrum is the talar head and not the calcaneocuboid joint. Number two, you should always supinate the forefoot and never pronate. So when you're trying to do the reduction, the forefoot should remain in supination. And the second is you should never pronate. As you see in this video, if you pronate the forefoot, you are increasing the cavus and not improving it. If you are now supinating, the cavus is improving. So the first step of Ponseti technique is correction of cavus. That is, you have to elevate the first metatarsal head to get the cavus correction. So as you all know, the babies can present to you at any age. So not single size will match everyone. You have to have your own inventory to cast these babies, because casting, although a benign procedure, the complications can be very difficult to manage. So it's always better to have good sized plasters available with you. You can either use plaster of Paris or soft rubber cast, depending on your training, availability, and other factors. So in this video, I would like to stress upon how a Ponseti cast is applied. But first, I would highlight few points. Number one, never pronate. The fulcrum should be at the talar head. And before you cast the patient, always gently manipulate the foot for 15 to 20 seconds every time you change the plaster. This helps you in getting more correction. A simple soft roll is applied in a single layer over the foot, and then adequate size plaster is rolled on the foot first. You can take few layers on the foot first and then gradually move upward this 50% of overlap. You have to be firm, not very loose, not very tight, and start applying the plaster from the fingers of the assistant who is holding the foot, and then you can gradually trim the plaster as per your need. And then molding the cast is very important. So you have to mold behind the heel so that it helps in giving a good contour on the heel. Keep your thumb on the talar head and do manipulations as we did earlier. And then I always prefer to fold the edge of the plaster so that when it becomes easy for the patients to remove the plaster to find the edge. There should be no continuous pressure at any of the points. And then you have to mold the arch as well to prevent the rock or bottom foot deformity. Once you finish with the below knee part, then you can move on to the above knee part with keeping the knee in 90 degrees of flexion. Usually 5 to 6 plasters are required. Depending upon how severe the foot is, you might be slightly more. And it is important that you adequately pat the edges of the plaster to prevent any pressure sores. It is also important that the toes remain supported. At the same time, they should be exposed to see for the circulation. Now, when it comes to removal of plaster, you can either soak the plaster or wrap them in wet bandage and then remove with a plaster knife, or you can ask the patients to unroll the bandage from the folded ends that you have used. So either ways is good. It is not advisable to use the plaster saws because we have seen cast saw injuries, and which again is more traumatic than the clubfoot deformity. Plaster care is important. Now, if you are using a soft rubber or any of the plasters, it is important that you observe that the toes are not disappearing. That is, they are not going back inside the plasters, because they will cause pressure sores in front of the ankle, behind the knee also. It is also important that you explain the patients how the plaster care is taken and also give them the instructions for removal. And I also make them sure that they have a helpline number available anytime during the treatment course. I personally prefer to use plaster of Paris because the patients sometimes come from remote, and for some reasons, if they have some problem with the plaster, at least they know how to remove it at home. So I feel plaster of Paris a little safer, especially in our part of the world where they come from deep interior rural villages. Once you have achieved a good correction, that is at least 40 to 50 degree of external rotation, and where you can palpate the calcaneal tuberosity, then you are ready to go for the tenotomy. Now, before I move on to the tenotomy, what I want to stress here is it's not the tenotomy which is the Ponseti technique. Basically, Ponseti technique is all about how you reduce the foot, how you manipulate the foot. Tenotomy is part of it, and it is not, the Ponseti technique is not only about tenotomy. To begin with, maybe you can start with a small incision because the foot is so small and the structures are very closely approximated to each other. And literature has documented complications of aneurysms of the posterior tibial, sometimes which is the only artery supplying the foot. There are small veins and nerves around the Achilles tendon. So to begin with, you can start with a small incision. Once you are aware of the anatomy location of the neurovascular bundles, then you can gradually shift on to a smaller incision techniques or even percutaneous techniques. Now this video will demonstrate you a midway between open and percutaneous. Give a small neck. With the help of a mosquito, develop interval between the Achilles tendon and the other structures. Put the knife into that interval. Rotate the knife 90 degrees and dorsiflex the foot. It is important that it should be a complete Achilles tenotomy. We use the tegaderm to approximate the skin edges, which helps us to be a sutureless technique. And then you apply the cast in a routine way. It should be in maximum external rotation of 50 to 60 degrees and up 10 to 15 degrees of dorsiflexion. Post-tenotomy cast remains for 3 weeks, and after that the patient is shifted on to the bracing protocol. We use this braces provided by the Clubfoot CIIT, that is Pure International India Trust. Bracing protocol, the standard guidelines are 3 months full time, that is 23 hours a day, except for nursing care, and then shift on to night and nap time bracing. Bracing protocol continues till 4 to 5 years of age. There are certain tips and challenges at every point of treatment. Patient can come for prenatal counseling. The patient can present with different forms of clubfoot, different problems of clubfoot. Then again, there can be certain suggestions on the casting material, bracing, and other follow-up things. I would like to highlight one type of clubfoot, which is called as the complex clubfoot, or which is also called as the atypical clubfoot. Here we have to sometimes modify the casting technique. You have to grab the forefoot to get more control of the foot because the foot is small. The tenotomy can be done after you get a good correction of 20 to 30 degree of abduction, and then again continue casting if required. Here the knee has to remain in more than 100 degrees of flexion. Here what you have to do is, instead of putting above knee cast completely, put a splint anterior to the knee and then give some rolls of plaster on it. Avoid over casting in the popliteal region. Some case scenarios. Here these two babies look similar because they have similar genetic pattern, same clubfoot, but the baby in the white dress responded well to Ponseti technique, and then he went on to walking age normally. But the same baby, we tried Ponseti technique, it did not respond after 6 or 7 plasters, and then we had to move on to a conventional soft tissue reconstruction procedure. So all club fits are club fit, but some are different, so we have to treat them a little different. I would like to also stress on clinical examination, because your treatment or the prognosis will depend on some things. This clubfoot looks a little atypical. Neurological, the child is not normal, and when we examine the spine and get an X-rays done, it's a caudal regression syndrome. Another baby, if you see, this is the normal foot which was examined, and it is showing good toe movements and ankle dorsiflexion. So this is part of the examination of clubfoot. We always stroke the sole of the foot and see how the child is responding. If the toes are actively moving, you're good. But sometimes the toes may not actively dorsiflex, the foot may not evert, and hence it is important that you document the neurological status. X-rays usually don't have role to play in idiopathic clubfoot, but certain conditions like fibular hemimalias, syndromic children, you have to do an ultrasound or an radio X-rays to find out whether congenital hip dislocations are there or not. Certain other scenarios where you have to modify your technique, you have to go slow. You can either do combined, that is TA tenotomy at the same time, or you can do Z plasties at a later age. So this child tenotomy was done at the same stage as the ring resection. Sometimes you have to play different techniques or innovations where this child was not able to bring his leg to neutral position, so we had to cast, and then like a Petri cast, we had put an abduction bar which maintained the position of the limb to a nearly neutral abduction. When it comes to problems of knee associated with the clubfoot, it is important that we reduce the clubfoot as well at the same time. so that we don't we get a good knee, but sometimes they recur and follow the treatment, do the same protocol, and then here she is 6 years down the line performing good on the stage. You can start treatment as early as like day 1, but also depends upon how the baby's condition is, whether the baby is stable, he is out of NICU, and also about the local condition. You can start late as 1 month. The results are equally good. Certain times we use the fiber cast or the soft rubber cast if we find that the patient is not going to take the plaster care proper, and where we need good control of the foot, especially when the child is of walking age. So we can use either of the plasters. The results are equally good with both of them. The best thing is there is a good plaster care and patient compliance and patient comfort with the soft rubber cast. Depending on your regional variations or the patient demands, you can either do plaster 2-3 times a week. They are equally effective. But never forget that it should always be a above knee plaster and not a below knee one. Bracing, you can either use these braces with some modifications if the baby is trying to pull out the foot every time, or modified or the recent braces like the Dobbs brace, which are more dynamic and the patient can independently move both the legs. Results are equally good. It is about the patient and the family convenience. Most important I would like to stress here is clubfoot clinic. So we always have all the patients casted on the same day. Everyone comes on that clubfoot clinic day so that the parents can interact with each other. Sometimes the parents are hesitant to ask some silly questions to doctors, but they are very comfortable with the other families who have clubfoot babies, and then they really get along with each other very well, and then they find that this is a much better place to get treated. So clubfoot clinic, dedicated clubfoot day, and parent interactions. Thank you. So
thank you, Dr. Nawadil.
Yeah.
Now I would request Dr. Varghese to share his clinical experience in managing clubfoot in older children.
I stopped sharing my screen. Now over to Dr.
Yes.
Matthews, sir, please.
Can you see my screen? No, this is not my screen.
Not
Okay.
your screen, we are seeing you.
Is that my screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Amit, for an extensive introduction to the topic. I'll quickly run you through the child who has come to you older, and that's very frequent in our part of the world, where the patients come to you much later than you would expect them. Greetings from the Cure International India Trust, which is in every state of India except for one now, but we're running clubfoot clinics in all government medical colleges. The Ponseti method has become the gold standard for infants, but what about the older child? So when an older patient comes to a clubfoot clinic which has been started, how do you deal with it? Social reasons compel them to come late, and therefore, how do you deal with that? Ponseti showed us that the technique is gentle and the technique has good long-term results. The surgical intervention has much poorer long-term results, as shown by many of the series that have come up after Ponseti's technique. What is the upper age limit? We initially started this in a clinic. This is a spectrum of age that we saw, and all of them eventually nowadays go in for Ponseti's method. So they all get the Ponseti's casting, and we treat them in Ponseti's method. But there are certain learning points. We started with younger than 3 years initially, older than 1, younger than 3 years. We tried the Ponseti's method, and we found the results were very good. We did podogram, we did x-rays to see the results were very good. Good correction, equinus, good valgus heal, and they did very well radiologically also. Now we don't do x-rays to look at them, but we now found in the much older children, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, now up to 12 years in girls and 14 years, depending on the skeletal maturity. It's not a dogmatic 12 or 14. depending on the skeletal maturity of the child's foot, we can do Ponseti's method. The basic principle of manipulation remains the same. Fulcrum is the head of the talus. You always supinate and then abduct. So here you have to do a little trick in doing the two-hand manipulation method. It's difficult to use the one-hand manipulation method. We found that a bow knee cast in an older patient, the 8-year-old, especially if his BMI is high, is difficult to manage. So we do one at a time. So we tend to tell the parents one at a time. It takes a little longer, but carrying is easier, going to toilet is easier, child can hop to the toilet and can manage. Some of them, despite their best efforts, will break the cast and come because they are older and heavier. So we started using these reinforcement of the cast using synthetic cast materials for them. Initially, we were giving them 90-degree cast, and then we realized it poses this problem of stiffness of the knee. So we keep them at 70, sometimes 60, sometimes 80, depending on the age of the patient, how well we mold it. That allows them to walk also. So if you put a unilateral cast, the child can continue to go to school instead of missing school. So you have to counsel the parents. So either you put a synthetic cast or you can put a sandal underneath the plaster to allow the child to walk to school. End of casting, again, you cannot get the 70-degree external rotation that is there in the younger child. The degree of rotation is much less. You have to the mold, the brace protocol also adjusted. Again, bracing is a big problem. There is no good brace that can hold the foot in that degree of abduction that is there. So what do? A compromise that we do is to give them a brace, which is ankle foot orthosis, and then maybe at night in the younger children and in the older children also, we are giving the foot abduction brace when they are not at school and they are at home. Long-term implication, we are not so sure. Earlier, we were doing tear lengthening in all these cases, but now we are doing tenotomy in most of these cases. Tenotomy, you need to practice and learn how to do it correctly. So here is a child, clubfoot, older patient has come to us with this is the deformity. We did a tenotomy in this child, did very well and did very well. This another child with this level of deformity operated 3 times. Severe cavus, severe varus, hindfoot equinus, did casting, needed about 10 casts for correction, and we were able to correct it. The literature talks about posterior release being required. In this child, we thought we might need it, but we were able to manage with just tenotomy. There are recent reports of tenotomy in older children also, even up to 9 years or so. That's same child, corrected. And we don't have that kind of a pop that you have in these older children, especially the ones that have been operated. And beware of doing it without an experienced person being around when you're doing this in these previously operated cases. That's the fully corrected foot. Nice heel valgus, cavus is reduced, hindfoot varus and forefoot is corrected, given an AFO. But what about the long term? He came back 8 months down the line with a recurrence. Again treated with a POP, corrected well. So we've been doing this correction using Ponseti's method in most of the children. Again, brace is a big problem in the older patients. So we are using these, but we know it is a problem. For want of anything better, we're using this. 11-year-old girl, unilateral clubfoot, already had a tail lengthening, recurrence. This is how she came to us. That's a severity of deformity. Only Ponseti casting and tenotomy, that's the correction that I've got. Look at the back. The only scar I have given is a small tenotomy scar, nothing else. But what can't I change? The size of the foot. I can't change the size of the foot. She needs to have custom-made footwear for both the sides. Another one, similar, callosities. You don't have to operate callosities. They will gradually drop off. Again, corrected by Ponseti's method. That's it. Callosity, it will gradually drop off. Full correction is achieved. Only tenotomy was done. Can you see that? Initially, they won't be able to stand on tiptoe. The left side is the normal side. The right side, the tendoachilles is not prominent. It'll take about 5 to 6 months for him to be able to stand and walk on tiptoe correctly. Again, unilateral, late presentation, size of the foot is a problem. Indication for picking them and catching them early on to treat them correctly. Bilateral, again, severe, walking on the outer border. we have this corrected by Ponseti by simple tenotomy. Simple, look at him. Tenotomy both sides, standing on tiptoe both sides, doing well. And that's just to show how tenotomy can be done in a closed method. It's not close to the calcaneum, cutting edge towards the cephalic side, push it anterior to the tendoachilles, and then rotate the blade 90 degrees and keep pressing it. You don't do a seesaw cutting. Just gently press it, otherwise you'll cut through the skin, otherwise you will damage. You have to be sure you're in front of the tendon, and suddenly the tendon will give way. And there'll be a pop. That's it. That's the tenotomy, which is complete, and you have good dorsiflexion. There's a gap that comes up, good dorsiflexion. Can you see the gap that is there? It's a good dorsiflexion that you have there. Similarly, another child, 23-year-old girl in whom you've done the same thing. All you see is a gap in this patient. And this 23-year-old girl, 6 months down the line, she could walk on tiptoe. So that's the clear message that we have. We have older patients benefiting from the Ponseti's principle and using the Ponseti's methodology to correct the deformity. And that's a football team we have of all children treated by using Ponseti's method for clubfoot. So it is useful in the older age group, not just idiopathic but also syndromic. Even in the operated cases, even you're not able to correct it fully, the magnitude of surgery that is required to correct the full correction, achieve full correction, is lesser than the others. Long-term results need to be seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Varghese. Now that concludes the speaker sessions on clubfoot management. Now I would open the session to comments from the panelists, starting from Dr. Slongo.
Okay, we have seen very nice 2 talks, but all these talks, of course, are presented by very, very experienced clubfoot surgeons, and the Ponseti technique is really fantastic. It was a big advantage in the clubfoot treatment, especially countries like you. But we must be careful. On one side, we have to recognize what is a clubfoot. It's not only the Achilles tendon and some deformity around the short bar. You know, once you have made preparation, anatomical preparation of a clubfoot, and you see how short the tibialis posterior, even also the tibialis anterior tendon or muscle is, without any amplitude. That means the os naviculare is overlapping the anterior part of the talus head. So for me, in this situation, therefore, then we have not good results in Ponseti. It's not possible to bring these bones apart because you have no good fixation that to bring it out. So in this situation, sometimes it's better to make a good aligned foot to open here as well. So therefore, for me, the real clubfoot treatment is, first of all, correct analysis, what is the major problem of this foot? How stiff is it? How old is the child? And what I need as a best. I agree, the old time of this huge, terrible operation should be over. Even with this operation, when you make it correct, you get good results. But we should, as always in our surgery, we should adapt each step of a treatment with some ideas and what we need. So then we get the best results. What I see exactly in this situation, when you look the longitudinal situation of the clubfoot, you know, it at the beginning it was like this. So with the tenotomy you are in this situation, but here in the midfoot you are still in this position, and you have to see the short foot. And when you correct also this, then you have a straight foot. Very often, when you make an X-ray, the first tarsus, goes not to the talus. The first tarsus goes still to cuneiform 2 or 3. And we call this deformity, residual deformity, we call this as the wild windmule machine from Netherlands. They are in this way. So only my comment is fantastic method in the good hand, has a learning curve, and we should adapt the different steps. Sometimes it needs a little bit more, sometimes it needs a little less.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dr. Strombo. It does have a learning curve. So when I started my learning how to, most important is to identify the landmarks. To start examining the normal foot first. When you get the feel of a talar head reducing on the navicular, that's the best point, learning point. So start examining the normal foot, normal newborns first, and then you come to know the anatomy of the foot, and then we can start the casting in a better way.
Yeah, absolutely. This is important. And the other question I have to you, normally, how many cast procedure per week you are doing? Only once a week or twice a week?
Once a week, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can tell you, of course, we have special condition in Bern, but my regime today is, first of all, we treat since 30 years. I was the first in the world. We treat all clubfoots with soft cast only. It's a big, big advantage. You will see when you do one. But now, the patient coming back, patient remove the cast, then they go for 30 minutes to the physiotherapist. The physiotherapist does the manipulation for me. The baby comes then to my plaster cast clinic. I have a prepared smooth baby, smooth foot, and can apply the cast in a better way. So this is the regime. So all babies go to the physiotherapy half an hour before, and then they came to me.
Okay, that's a nice suggestion.
Thank you, Dr. Strombo, and thank you, Dr. Nemadin. Now I would request Dr. Vijay Singhi to share his comments and clinical experience on this.
Yeah, basically, the principles, of course, I agree with what is said by Dr. Amit and Dr. Matthew Varghese. It is basically, I like to say that it is like a surgical technique that we are practicing. The precision has to be there. When you go for surgery, of course, we learn about the technique, we practice the operative technique and go for surgery. Here, the application of the plaster cast is something similar. Exact points of application of the pressure, exact way of manipulation, and then your instruments are your soft rolls and the POP cast. So you have to consider those are good instruments, and then again, very important to have a proper soft roll as well as the proper fast setting POP cast to get optimum results. Mm-hmm. I think the people who are using POP cast all will agree with me. And then we had a chat about value of POP over artificial casting, articast. Of course, in our part of the world, we use mainly the plaster of Paris cast. I feel that it has some value over artificial cast because it is cost-wise, it is less costly. Number one. Number two, the most important thing is it is easily moldable. The molding plays a very, very important role in Ponseti technique and Ponseti management. And when it comes to to application, it is very easily moldable, as well as removal is much easier. And we ask in my clinic, I have a dedicated clubfoot clinic in my hospital, and I ask all the parents, I teach them how to get it removed just before coming to the clinic, and then before application of the next cast. Then another point that I think Dr. Amit didn't touch that much is about the antenatal diagnosis. Of course, now it is in vogue, and it's happening in all over the world. And this, of course, when they diagnose antenatally, of course, it's very easy to allay fears of the parents. When you have a chat with them prior to the delivery, of course, then they are basically reassured that this can be completely corrected. In our part of the world, when parents see a child with a deformed foot at birth, I mean, they are basically shocked, and they don't want to show that foot to their relations or anybody, because they were not aware about this kind of thing happening. So that is one of the things that antenatal diagnosis is important, and then basically to educate parents about what is to come. The second one is the atypical clubfoot. Of course, he touched on atypical clubfoot, and then it is an entity that we see not very often, but it is there. And then the manipulation technique is completely different, right? So that we have to remember. And then if you try to do it in the same way that we are doing for the idiopathic clubfoot, the conventional clubfoot, you are going to fail. So that's all I have to highlight at this juncture. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay Singh. Can I request Dr. Varghese to share any additional comments?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Vijay Singh, to bring in the point. Just a clarification on nomenclature. The iatrogenic complex clubfoot that we have is usually as a result of cast slippage. So when you start a Ponseti clubfoot clinic and start treating them in early on cases, if your cast is not molded well, if your cast is not a snug fitting cast, if your knee joint is not at 90 degrees in a child, and there is too much of padding, or it is a short cast, then the cast tends to slip. And when it slips, then the heel pushes into the cylindrical portion of the cast, and the edge of the anterior portion of the cast digs into the dorsum of the foot, causing edema. Heel becomes squashed, and you have exaggerated equinus coming up. And this is the pathogenesis of a complex clubfoot. There are some children that come with a similar appearing deep plantar crease, as we call plantaris, and these are children that are not because of casting. And this is a little different. They behave much better than the slip cast. So the disappearing toe in a child who's had a cast is something which is bad for outcome. So you must warn the parents. If the child's toe disappear into the cast, then please remove the cast immediately at home. That's why training them to remove the cast at home is very useful, because if it happens at home, you don't leave a slipped cast on. A slip cast can cause pressure sores, a slip cast can cause edema, a slip cast causes complex clubfoot. And there the manipulation is different. You give a cast holiday for such children, and remember, it's not the first cast that slips, because the first cast is at an angle, the foot is in equinus and varus and adduction. As your supination and adduction gets corrected, the foot comes in line with the leg, and that's when your cast slips, and usually is the third or the fourth cast that slips. So remember, warn the parents on the third or the fourth cast, please watch out for slipping, disappearing toes. So that's a very important thing. It will always happen, and I have seen, as Dr. Vijay Singh and Dr. Thadi mentioned, the technique is a very, very tricky technique. You have to learn it, you have to perfect it. I have trained over 5,000 doctors, and I've conducted over 80 workshops in this, and I found lectures I've shown models. Yet, when I do them hands-on on models, their hand positioning is not good. So it needs a very careful skill development. Psychomotor skills have to be really good. Otherwise, if you have a new clinic, you have many children coming to you with a slip cast and many children with complex club feet.
Thank you, sir. That was a very important point that you mentioned. It does have some learning curve.
Yes, Dr. Swami.
From my side, I think that these were very important points. And in addition to this, plaster cast, even you are using fiber, soft cast, is a teamwork. You cannot do this by yourself. Sometimes I say the the assistant or the nurse who holds the baby is more important than the man who makes the plaster cast. Then the good positioning, the good fixation of the foot makes casting much easier. And one point for the slipping cast, we are using now 30 years the soft cast, and as the soft cast can mold much better to the leg than the plaster of Paris, we have never seen again this slipping cast. Before, it was a big problem. Every fifth patient came back after 1 or 2 days sometimes, because of the slipping of the cast. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Sloan.
If time
Yes, Dr.
permits,
Vijay.
see his video as well.
Yeah, small point to add to what Dr. Matthews said actually about the slippage of the cast. 2 reasons for slippage. One is, as he said, iatrogenic. Second reason is that the foot to start with is atypical club foot. I mean, the atypical club foot, the classical features are the short big toe, deep plantar crease, and deep posterior and ankle crease. So if a child is coming with, if to start with, if it is a atypical club foot, and if a child is coming repeated with slippage of cast, of course, then you have to adjust your technique in such a way to get the correction while maintaining the cast.
Yeah.
Okay.
So due to lack of time, we could not cover all the important points, but if required by the audiences, we can share some literature through SET. That is not a problem, so that they can go through the literature and be aware of all these things. So that's possible.
Yes. So I thank all the panelists for a good panel discussion. Now we conclude the first segment on the club foot management. Now we move on to the second part of the program, which is management of developmental dysplasia of hip. So now I would request Dr. Amit Nimade to start his session on challenges and tips in the management of DDH.
Okay.
Over to you, Dr. Nimade.
Yeah. Thank you, Praveen. So let's move on to the second part, that's DDH. So DDH, as we all know, it can range from a mildly dysplastic but concentrically reduced and stable hip to a hip that is frankly dislocated and severely dysplastic. But no matter how it presents, the main aim or the goal is to achieve a concentric, stable hip and avoid the complications of treatment, mainly AVN. So it can present as a simple dysplastic hip, as you see on the right side, subluxated or nearly dislocated hip here, or a unilateral or a very high riding hip dislocations, even bilateral cases. So I would not go into too much of the pathology, but it is important that we touch it shortly. It is important that the femoral head and the acetabulum remain in contact because they act as a complement to each other for their development. As you see here, if the femoral head moves out, it will cause first the eversion of labrum and then inversion as it is pressing it from above, and then formation of a pseudoacetabulum. If you look at it more carefully, as the femoral head dislocates out, the iliopsoas tendon tightens. It causes hourglass constriction of the capsule. The ligamentum teres hypertrophies. There's a pulvinar which is filled up in the acetabulum, and there is a formation of pseudoacetabulum. Now, because of the continuous pressure of the femoral head on the ilium, the femoral head will get deformed. There's a flattening of the medial side of the femoral head. So these factors you should always keep in mind, because when you're going to treat either by closed or open methods, you have to address all these aspects of DDH. Now, as we all know, the risk factors are firstborn female child, breech presentations, and especially swaddling as a new trend, and then associated anomalies like torticollis, metatarsus adductus, etc. From our part of the world, we are at a little advantage because the way we carry our children, this is the best way a hip can develop in newborns. Both hips abducted, hips flexed to 90 degrees, and then the hip goes on to a normal development. I would like to mention something about swaddling. Swaddling increases the chances of hip dysplasia. Also, the other reason of increased reasons for late presentation is the reduced clinical experience or expertise in examination and lack of OPD repeated checkups in the neonatal clinics. These children have to be examined regularly, especially those having the high risk factors. Now, swaddling is not bad, provided it is done in a proper way. I have taken this technique from the IHDI website. It is freely available to everyone. So in short, this technique is like, you can be a little firm on the chest and the torso, but when you come on to the lower limb part, it has to be very loose. And when you finish wrapping the legs, be sure that the hips are able to flex to 90 degrees and go into some abduction. So you don't cause the hips to remain in extension and adduction. We have already know all these techniques of clinical examination. Clinical examination is important, but sometimes may not be reliable. Autolung and Barlow tests are really very important, but I would like to tell you something about some tests which can be misleading. For example, the asymmetric thigh folds. So patients do have asymmetric thigh folds, but the hips can be normal radiologically. They can be even a little dysplasia, which is difficult to diagnose, or it can be a frankly dislocated hip. Coming to asymmetric thigh abduction, which is again high risk sign or a sign for further investigations. But sometimes children with complete hip dislocations do have full abduction. That is because of the ligament laxity or hypotonia or any other associated factor. So it is important that we don't rely on any single test. Here the child had a limb length discrepancy. So certain clinical signs do give us clue, but not all should be relied upon. When it comes to investigations, X-ray diagnosis at an older age is not at all difficult. Even in younger age group, in some cases it is easy, but where it is difficult is when the capital femoral epiphysis is yet to appear. Ultrasound examination by a trained radiologist may not be available to everyone, even in the interior ones. So this classification or radiological evaluation by IHDI can come handy. Now, what this classification or evaluation method says that you have to draw the Hilgen-Lehner's line, that is at the upper end of the triradiate cartilage, and the Perkins line, which is at the outer end of the ossified acetabulum. Then you have to bisect the lower outer quadrant into two with a 45-degree line, and then you also mark the H point. This H point is the midpoint of the proximal femoral metaphysis. Now, depending on the location of this metaphysis, it can be grade 1 if it is medial to the P line. It is between this medial to the bisector is grade 2, lateral to the bisector is grade 3, and above the H line is grade 4. So this is an example where the femoral epiphysis is yet to appear. You draw the midpoint here and all the other lines. So this shows that the hip is dysplastic grade 3. Ultrasound is ideal investigations for younger children where it is available, and it is not at all difficult to interpret the ultrasound images. If you realize that the images given by the ultrasound or the radiologist is exactly the AP view of the pelvis. So it is not at all difficult to interpret. What is important is you should understand what lines you have to draw and where the structures have to be. Now that white line of the this ossified ileum is demarcated by this line. Then you have the acetabular roof and you have the labrum. Now the femoral head ideally should have been located under the bony roof, but here it has migrated outside. So nothing difficult to understand in this. And depending on these angles, you draw your angles. So for the bony roof, you have the alpha angle, and for the cartilaginous roof, you have the beta angle. Now, Graf has given this classification which helps us in determining the line of treatment. I always keep this chart printed in my clinic because for me, it is difficult to remember every time. But I simply remember it, whether to classify it as a dysplastic or non-dysplastic hip is A for alpha, it should be above 60. B for beta, it should be below 60. For normal, alpha should be above 60 and beta should be below 60. So that's a cutoff limit to whether to say it's a dysplastic hip or not. So the treatment depends upon the age of the patient and the severity of the dysplasia. So depending on the age, it can be either a Pavlik harness or a closed reduction. So I'm going to touch only on this because we have Dr. Slongo who is going to tell us about late presentations and his experience of more than 4 decades in this. So the panelists, I would like to ask you about these two cases. This is a case of a 2-month-old baby having a Graf 2A hip, and this is a case 2 of 5-month-old baby who has a Graf 3 hip. Now, how would you treat this? Would you just observe or give a public harness or any other method of your choice? For case 1. Dr. Slongo, please.
In this situation, this is still a reducible hip.
Yeah.
Labrum looks not so bad, but laxity is the problem. So we will go here for a controlled abduction brace. That depends how much resistance the adductor muscle have. Only one point, we never, over the last 30 years, we never made adductorectomy. This is absolutely pathological to do this. It's not necessary. But we go for a stable fixation, perhaps for 3 weeks in a hip spica and then the splint. But I personally will never go in a public harness because it's unstable, and public harness is an unstable brace. So the goal is unstable hip, stabilization, stable hip. You can treat this with an unstable system.
Yep. Dr. Matthews, sir, would you like to comment on this?
Yeah. Remember the time at which the child has come, it is 2 months down the line.
Yeah.
On the usual dislocatable hip, if they are going to go back to normalcy, they would have gone back by 6 weeks. Beyond 6 weeks is the time when the hip is actually going to be unstable, will tend to go and present like this. And therefore, you have to be a little careful. Some of these children, we may still consider, we do public harness in some of these children. But if I am treating such a child in a public harness, I'll make sure, I'll do an ultrasonography to be sure the hip is going in. If it is concentrically, if it is not going in concentrically, I will not do a public harness. I would prefer to do a hip spica in this child. I will not do a public harness. I have to be sure that the hip is in, because these hips, all of them may not be going in completely. This is 2 months old, and that's a risky time. If the child comes to me soon after birth with this kind of a presentation, then I would be happy to try up to 6 weeks, yes, a public harness.
Yeah. Dr. Sunil, how would you treat this case too? 5 months?
Yeah, basically my decision is based on ultrasound findings and my clinical examination. If the child comes at the age of 5 months, the first visit, of course, I look at the scan, alpha angle, and the dynamic scan, whether it is dislocated and it is very reducible or not. And when you do the dynamic scan at either dynamic Ortolanis or Barlow's, then you can get a good idea about whether the head is sitting nicely in the socket.
Yeah.
So if it is sitting nice in the socket, and then of course at the age of 5 months, I would rather prefer to go more for spica than the public harness. And if I am using public harness, in case if parents are not very happy to go for the spica, I might go for the harness with the help of some nappies in the center to keep the hips in abduction. So that is basically additional security measure I use to keep the hips in abduction in addition to the flexible harness. And then monitor regularly with the scan, and then within a short period of time, if I realize that it is not going to be stable in the socket, of course I will switch on to the spica.
Okay. Dr. Slongo, you want to say something?
Yeah, there are two points. Moment. Okay. 2 points regarding this. Correctly, the most of you said now in this age group, unstable hip, they will go more for hip spica than for public. I'm very happy with this because again, this is an unstable situation and we need stabilization. Even you would go for the hip goes in and then you decide to go for public, but this is a singular view. The child in the public moves always. Do you not know how many times the hip is a little bit in this position, this position, this position? I will have a brace who keeps the hip always under pressure in the correct position, that the hips moves in this way, but not in this way. This is very, very, very important point. And the second point I would mention, I guess this is not the parents. Also in our house said, oh, I reason we can have a splint or a Paulik, and you explain that now we should have a hip spica. But I say always, if you do not accept in this situation a hip spica, please go to another clinic, because this is not that we can play in this way or in this way. You know, you said before, if the parents do not accept the spica, I will go for this. Even you are convinced it's not good. This we should not do.
Point, Dr. Sangwa, and then we can have more discussion on this once we finish. I am sure you're going to enlighten us from your talk on this a lot, especially about your brace and technique. Yeah. So just to summarize, so a Paulik harness is, although it is a simple thing, but it is not a risk-free treatment. So you have to be very cautious in selecting which cases you want to treat. So from these two cases, what we conclude is if it is a subluxatable but reducible, dislocatable but reducing inside the acetabulum concentrically, only then we should go for a Paulik harness. Else it is better not to use and shift on to some other technique rather than accepting some complications. So follow-up with hip ultrasound is important to see that the hip is getting reduced. Even if at the end of 3 to 4 weeks, if the hip is not getting reduced, it's better to discontinue the treatment rather than facing complications. Once the hip becomes stable, it is better to continue with the Paulik harness for another 6 weeks and then shift on to bracing for night and nap time. The problems associated with Paulik harness are sizes may not be available because the baby is small. Femoral nerve palsy is seen in 2.5% of cases. But what we are more worried is about the avascular necrosis, sometimes which can be as high as 28%, which is documented in literature, which may not be acceptable to some physicians. And then residual dysplasia, which may require second surgery at a later age. So Paulik harness is only for unstable, subluxated, but reducible and hips, and avoid high, and Paulik harness should be avoided in high and irreducible, that is Ortolani negative dislocations. If you are sure that the hip is not getting reduced with harness or the child is presenting late, then you have an option, especially between 6 months to 1.5 years of age, where close reduction and spica can be tried. Let's go through some of these findings. Arthrogram is an important investigation that you do. It is important that you understand the arthrogram findings. Now I will highlight 2 findings. One is the medial dipole. It should be usually less than 3 to 5 millimeters. And the femoral head coverage. Now femoral head coverage is something calculated like this. So the femoral head coverage, if it is less than 30%, it is not acceptable, which requires open reduction or further surgeries. So femoral head coverage is more easy to identify on CM and X-ray images because measurement errors can be there because of the IITV. So femoral head coverage can be a good parameter. But in spite of that, some children may require second surgery for acetabular dysplasia. Therefore, they have to be followed for a longer time. Once you have got a close reduction, sometimes you have to add on to the adductor tenotomy, percutaneous or open. Better to do open because there are vessels close to it. So open adductor tenotomy is my choice, and then do an arthrogram. So once you've got a reduction, you have to assess how good the reduction is and how stable it is. What is your zone of stability? If your zone of stability is less, it means that the reduction is unstable. If the zone of stability is more, yes, you have a good reduction. Once you are sure that you have a good safe zone of reduction, then you can go on for a spica application. The position of spica is usually flexion of 90 degrees. Abduction range can vary depending upon how much abduction the baby has. The usual technique is like you can go to maximum abduction and then come down to a little less so that you have more range of abduction. The more abduction you give, the higher chances of AVN are there. And then internal rotation of 10 to 15 degrees is also important. Now, this is just a case example. This was an unstable hip. We did an arthrogram. There's a good thin layer of dipole seen medially. Femoral head coverage is good. And then we went on to a spica. Now, this spica was the second spica ideally we should include the foot to have a better control. You can either include both the legs or one leg depending upon the condition. You can use Gypsona or what I meant to say is plaster of Paris or a soft cast or an Articast. We usually use a combination. Now I would here like to share a trick. Sometimes you are in a position where you don't have an IITV, but you have to manage this case. You want to do it under X-ray control. Now this video clip will show that you are exactly inside the hip joint capsule. Once you put a needle inside, try to push distilled water. If the distilled water is gushing back again into the syringe, equal amount going in and equal amount coming up, then you are inside the capsule. If you observe carefully again, so when you push the saline inside, the leg also moves. It means that you are 100% inside the capsule. So you may not have a C-arm, but yes, you can do this technique and you can confirm this. And you see the pressure with the water comes out, the saline comes out. So if it is in soft tissue, this will never happen. And then once you're sure your arthrogram is good, then you go on for a spica. We usually do it on a spica board if the baby is small. Adequate padding on the abdomen, cover the private parts so that you don't mess up with the plasters over there, and then gentle soft roll covering everywhere. It is important that you mold over the trochanter, and it is suggested that the one who is going to maintain the reduction or the senior person should hold the hip inside, and then the plaster is applied. It is important you mold the trochanter, otherwise your hip is going to slip out. If you're using plaster of Paris, you can use an abduction bar which gives more additional stability. At the end of the spica, don't forget to turn the patient and see the edges of the plaster, because we have seen bad complications of this, and then you'll end up into more trouble. So padding all the edges and seeing that all the edges are free and there are no pressure points. This is a small video of a similar case of DDH. It was a good arthrogram, and then this was a little elder baby who was taken on a spica board. So here you see that plaster of Paris roll is applied, and then you reinforce the joints with slabs, and then if required you can put more plasters or use the soft rubber cast or Articast to complete the cast and give stability. So this gives additional stability, and at the end, make sure that your hip is inside, get an X-ray. Now I'll come to this point of a post-reduction imaging. Now it is advisable that once you have done your reduction, you get a single slice CT or a spica MRI to confirm your reduction. This can be done in the same sedation when the baby is shifted from the theater. This helps in confirming that our reduction is concentric. Some very no one would like to see these pictures of spica complications. Surgery went well, but the patient landed into this problem. Not good. So spica care is very important. Post-op protocol. Now post-op protocol after a closed reduction is usually the plaster is changed at the end of 6 weeks. It is done under anesthesia. Assess the stability. If you are sure that the hip is stable, put a spica again for 6 weeks. If you have any doubt, you can do an arthrogram and reassess. If you are not happy, you can move on to another treatment. But if you find the hip is stable, you can change for one more spica. So it goes roughly around 2 spica changes at 6 weeks. And then after at the end of 12 or 18 weeks, you shift on to a abduction bracing. Now it is important to move on to abduction bracing because the hip otherwise will get stiff. You have to mobilize the hip as well and also maintain the reduction. So night and nap time bracing can continue a little longer depending upon the clinical scenario, whether it's a teratologic hip or a simple DDH. Thank you. I end with this. On the conservative management, especially till the closed reduction, I have not covered the open reduction. Now, may I request Dr. Slongo to take over on his presentation for the late presentation DDH. And if the time permits, we would like to see your traction method of treating DDH.
Before, you were asking me first also to show this one about the younger patient.
Yeah.
So, yeah, good. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so a little bit our view, I guess this is sometimes sorry. So sorry, I have to go back. So the congenital hip dysplasia in children younger than 1 year, what we are doing in Bern. First of all, I guess for the young people, and also what you mentioned before, it is important that you know the etiology. And I can tell you now the European and the Swiss perspective. Failure or delay in the first 3 months of life when the exponential formation of the hip happens. And this is so important, and therefore you are always in a bad situation, because kids, normally the majority of the kids are coming in later, and then this form a part. What we have to know, at the birth, the acetabulum is still not fully developed. All children have a dysplasia at birth, but in the short time, this mature. And therefore, certain spread with the development of acetabulum is available. That means, as you can see here, we have a good cartilage coverage, but the bony socket at birth is always not optimal. And in a normal situation, this is the normal development of a hip. In the majority of the baby, this happens. What is also important, that when the child gets older, that we have an increasing muscle tension and a spontaneous movement. And this creates also a good development of the hip, as we know from Graf's curves. The quick normal ossification or strength muscular tension results in a non-centric hip. That means if something goes wrong here, then the hip goes not in a normal, then the hip goes in this way. So that you should know this schema here. These are two hips at birth. Normally, ossification, we end up in a normal hip. But for some reason, we go to dysplasia. Then the discentric hip, and then if time is going on, to the dislocation. So you, in your country, you very often end up in this or in this, but we should avoid to go in this way. So what is the situation behind this? Even in a newborn baby, the bony socket is oblique, but the cartilage is around, and the pressure is in this way. But if you see this, the cartilage goes around, but the acetabulum is in this way, and this creates shear forces. That means the head migrates upwards, as we have seen in the animation before. So what is our frequency? Hip dysplasia, hip at risk. We have 10% of all the baby have a hip at risk. Unstable hips, only 1 to 4%. Female, male, you see 1 to 50. Regarding full displacement, it's different, 1 to 100. For girls, that it's very, very seldom in Switzerland that a boy has a dislocated hip. So what is our standard diagnosis? Standard ultrasound examination of the hip according Graf with 2 to 3 weeks and 5 to 6 weeks. So every baby is seen twice. Now this is paid by the government. The treatment immediate after birth is so possible. So we have the greatest potence for after repairing. X-ray can show development problems only after 3 months of life, as we have seen before. And the famous picture is the Van Rosen. This is the best picture. So according to the Graf situation, you see here on the left, we have hip types 1 to 4. And you see we go from green or yellow to red. This is like in the traffic. Green light is free, red is stop. So according to this different classification, we adapt our treatment. So you can see this. I will show this. So then we have this type. Pathology, stable hip is a 2, B and C. After repairing, we give to a Kramer splint. I will show this, or a Paulik harness. If this hip is unstable, like C2C or G or D, we go for retention. We never go in an unstable hip directly to a splint. That means, according to the clinic, without abduction limitation, hip spica with abduction limitation, we go to the overhead traction, hip spica and splint. And in the discentric hip, as read, that is the D, 3 and 4, we go always for a gentle reduction, never acute, overhead traction, hip spica, eventually arthrography, eventually a open reduction, and then the splint. So here, coming back to the type 2, 2B, 2C, if there is no abduction problem, we go for this Kramer splint. Looks like a pelvic, but you see, the abduction is controlled. The rotation point is in the hip joint and not outside, and they can change the pampers and the clothes only by open this. This is a big advantage that the patient has not always to manipulate on the baby. This is for the hip 2, 2B, and 2C. Here we see such an example. At 2 weeks, we have graft type 2C. After treatment, 6 weeks, we have a 2A, as you can see. And after 3 months of treatment, we have a normal hip. So this is all controlled by ultrasound. I can tell you, in our clinic, no babies get an X-ray until the age of 2 years, before all by ultrasound. Of course, we have discussed this before, and you see now the difference. Of course, you can do this by pelvic harness, but the pelvic harness does not control the abduction, the rotation, the position. It's only a flexion brace, and therefore I'm not happy. And if to change this, then the parents have to remove it. What is important, I can say to you as well, patient information. This is the sheet we give to the patient as an information that they know and understand. And here, even on the patient information, they have all our regime. So they can exactly see, oh, my child is here, or my child is in this group and goes in this treatment. So this is the overhead, hip spica, or Castor-Plus. Coming up to the unstable hip, as you can see, this is 2G and C or D. We go always for retention. According to the clinic, without limitation, directly to a hip spica. You see here, not with the foot included, I normally do it. Or in case we have adductor spasmus, we go for overhead. And now we come to the decentric hip, not centric, the decentric hip. What is decentric? Decentric is type D, type 2D, 3A, 3B, and 4. These kids need a reduction, gentle reduction, and we do this with this overhead reduction. In your clinic, you can do this, then you bring in on this. This is preparation for the patient. Then you see the baby is fixed, skin traction, overhead. This is important, overhead. That means you see the rules are here. That means it goes oblique. The hip is here, fixed here. So we go over 90 degrees. That means that this makes a hypomocleon in this way. So then we go stepwise every day 10 degrees, depending on the tension here. Sometimes only 5 degrees, up to 120, not more. So then we make an X-ray, and we see, oh, the hip is centered. The line is okay, everything. Then we can go for the plaster cast. So how to make the plaster cast? You know, here you see, okay, this is not optimally. What we did a contraction in this way for 3-4 days. And then you see now the hip is normal in the acetabulum. So this is now the way to go for a hip spica. Again, you see, this is the situation. Sometimes we make arthrogram to see if it's in or not. So now our trick is, this is the end position. And our trick is never manipulate this situation. We don't need anesthesia. The child is sleeping. The mother and the nurse holds the baby, and we bring the cotton trousers over the baby. The hip is always in the same situation as you can see here. Then we start with the padding, first only up to the knee, then we give soft cast around, up to the knee, we molded it, hold it in the correct position, and you see the patient, the baby was never manipulated. So that gives a high guarantee, dental guarantee. Once the soft cast is hard, we remove the traction and we bend the knee and we make the rest in this way. And this is all soft cast. Once soft cast is hard, we give one layer of fiberglass. It's only one layer for stability, and then we cut out here, as you know, and click it down, and then it looks like this, and we give the baby back to the parents. So this is the safest way for to make a hip spica, the safest way not to redislocate the hip, and the safest way to make a good X-ray, a hip spica. So now back to the Lörracher brace for the older baby. Even the older baby can start to walk, and you see here immediately, and very nice, that the rotation center is always the hip, and we have pressure to the hip, so the baby can start to walk. So the therapy philosophy, unstable fixation is only allowed in stable hip situation, and that means then we go for this. Unstable hips must be fixed in a stable way. That means without reduction, even then we go for hip spica. Here we see some examples. X-ray diagnostic follow-up. The first X-ray for control we make with 20 to 24 months in every treated TDH. Remaining development deficit despite initial correction treatment possible can be. The goal is AC angle at 24 months less than 22 degrees. Shenton lines reverse must be intact. Delayed diagnosis, if you see it after 3 months, then you have to go again. And if you see the child later, months of life, no immediate therapy, waiting after second or third year of life, and then open reduction and pelvic osteotomy. That means a child of 6 or 8 months, we let it as it is. We never start to manipulate, you will end in AVN. And in our case, a situation, we have seen over 30 years, not one AVN. Here you see again such a situation, it's good. Then here, the Heilgenreiner hip must be here, not here, not here, not here. So it must be inside. And here we have seen this before. You have the lines. And in the arthrogram, you can change this as well. So in summary, we should profit from the exponential growth in the first 3 months of life. Early examination, first 6 weeks with ultrasonography reduces the delay of hip nearly to zero. For the success of the therapy, the early treatment is more importantly than the heaviness of the dysplasia. And starting with the therapy as early as possible at fifth week of life. AVN can minimize to zero. We must distinguish between exogenic and endogenic, X-ray control after 24 months, and this is what is our regime. Thank you very much. You see, it's a little bit different what they are doing, but this is the modern way when you have the ability to see kids. And I guess the goal of India must be to come to this approach as we have it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Slongo. We don't have a universal screening program where these can be diagnosed early, but those presenting to high-risk centers with high-risk babies, we do get them screened. And then it's good to learn from you the traction technique. Thank you very much.
Good.
Dr. Sunil, you have any suggestions, any comments on this?
From my side,
yes.
Screening.
Sorry.
This was very interesting. 20 years ago, because the screening is paid by the government, and then one of the health ministers said, "Oh, is this really true that with the screening we can reduce open reduction or AVN or all bad hips?" And then I was involved in a multi-center study for 2 years in whole Switzerland. And we could show very, very clearly that with screening, we could reduce all the bad hips and open reductions. And in our country, you know, and this can be a possibility for India, the majority of the ultrasound is not made by the radiologist or the pediatric orthopedics, is made by the pediatrician. In Switzerland and Germany and Austria, the pediatrician goes a 2 weeks course to learn ultrasound, and the pediatrician sees the child, you know, and he sent then the child to me.
Okay, we have a different regulations here, so it may not be possible. But yes, universal screening can definitely save major surgeries in the child's younger age group. Agreed. Over to Sunil, Dr. Sunil, sir.
Yeah, in our country, of course, almost all the deliveries are happening in hospitals. Very, very rare to see nowadays any home deliveries. And then all these babies go through a pediatrician at birth. And therefore, we detect any DDH very early at birth. And especially, more attention is paid to those babies who are having high risk factors, like you mentioned there. And then they are referred to the nearest or closest orthopedic surgeon for further treatment. So therefore, very, very, nowadays, it's very rarely we see neglected DDH or DDH presenting to orthopedic surgeon at the walking age as the first presentation. And in our experience is like we manage them with the protocol that I mentioned earlier, with harness, and then with additional security of abduction using the nappies, and we have a very good results. And then about the traction, of course, it's very interesting actually. I mean, I think I heard the same thing from one of the Japanese surgeons, orthopedic surgeons presentation recently about how do they use traction to the same effect. Yes, maybe we don't have that kind of, you don't need that much of infrastructure, but we need to learn the technique, I suppose, like you are learning the Ponsonby technique. It is a specific technique. And if you don't use it properly, of course, you might do more harm than good. So maybe we'd like to share the literature with Dr. Solongo about the technique, and then hopefully we might be able to implement it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Keeping the patient indoor is not a big problem, especially if we counsel them regarding the problems and complications that can arise from an alternative treatment. Beds are not a problem considering the incidences and beds available. But yes, it is definitely a treatment option, and I look forward to learn from Dr. Solongo on this. Dr. Praveen, are you there? Can we take some questions from the audience?
Yes, now we can start the Q&A session.
Yeah.
Dr. Matthews, if you have any comments to add?
Just a comment on the screening protocol. Dr. Vrisha Madhuri in Vellore and Dr. Anil Mehtani here in Lady Harding both have used screening techniques. And Vrisha's technique for screening using ultrasonography, she's used nurses trained in doing ultrasonography, not even pediatricians. And she found that nurses are able to do the of these cases with dysplastic hip easily with a little training that they have. So she has a training module for nurses, and they have been trained to recognize these dysplastic hips. So there is a model there where they are using not doctors but nurses for doing sonography to pick up cases. I think Vrisha Madhuri did a very good job on that.
Yeah, I can tell you from our situation, at the beginning, it was clear that every radiologist or pediatric orthopedist said, no, screening, ultrasound must be in our hand. But we have no time to do this. But the nurse or the pediatrician has more time and see more baby. And if there is a program, a certificated program that they can learn it, they make it better than I make it, because they make hundreds. And this is a good way also for your country, I guess, that nurses, family doctors and so on, but with in a good education. And this is really, really a good situation. Yes.
We have made a recommendation at the national level.
Yeah.
And the first program could be done to a wider scale.
Absolutely. I guess
there
this
are
must.
some legal issues involved in this, especially while using an ultrasound in our part of the world. So that will take time, but I think that should happen in near future.
Yeah.
The legal issues are there in between.
But
Yeah.
they're relaxing it, especially in light of the emergency use of ultrasonography and increasing use of anesthesia, people using ultrasonography. So the use is getting wider.
Yeah.
You know, I can tell you a history on also the delegates hearing us. You know, when we started 30 years ago with this, then we as surgeons said, "Oh, that's not good to start with the ultrasound. Then we have no more work." You know, and that's true. That's true. The open reduction decreased dramatically. You know, today open reduction of a hip is for a iatrogenic. That means in some syndromic cases, or all the immigrants we have from outside, you know, from India, from Africa, from everywhere, they bring. So my experience now for open reduction came from the immigrants, not from the Swiss people. And this is very interesting. I can stimulate India with the facilities they have, nurses, countryside doctors, to go for ultrasound, because every early diagnosed hip is a success.
Absolutely.
So do you do, Dr. Solongo, do you do screening in every baby, or only for high risk babies, or only that you diagnose
Exactly.
only you diagnose unstable hips clinically?
Now, this is a good question. This was the discussion 15 years ago when we were speaking about the costs, and then we have seen it makes no sense to go only for clinical signs. As we heard in the first talk, clinical sign is not always a good sign. You can have ortolani positive with nothing, and so on. So in the meantime, we recommend, and with the program is for all. But in the meantime, we have some crazy parents, you see, around the world. They say, no, my baby, we do not allow, because the ultrasound influenced the brain of my baby and all this, you know, all these stupid people, I guess, that are around the world. But principle, independent of the risk signs. So ultrasound has a negative effect in Switzerland. Our young pediatrician and the young doctors, they are not longer able to clinical check a child, because, you know, we never check a child. The child born goes to the ultrasound. One point is only important for us. Ortolani sign is forbidden in Switzerland. Never make again. You know, at this time, ortolani sign was a good clinical sign. But nowadays with the ultrasound, we don't need it. We don't need it. And every ortolani sign you produce damage the head. I ask always the colleagues, hey, Dr. Ahmed, do you like that I dislocate your hip and bring it back? No, you will not have it. And you know, something like, look here, clack. It's forbidden. In clinical, it's forbidden. We have ultrasound. If I will know, then we go for ultrasound. That's it.
Yeah.
Good session.
Well, I thank all the panelists for a good discussion. Now we move on to the next segment of the program, which is a Q&A session. So the first question is from Dr. Praveen Thapa, addressed to Dr. Matthew Varghese. His question is, in clubfoot management, does early manipulation help, or is it better to directly go for casting on day one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Dr. Varghese.
The only problem with manipulation is you have to spend time with the parents to explain to them and be sure that they've learned it correctly. So I do not rush to start casting on the first day. I'm afraid that some of them may not do it correctly if it is not supervised. So therefore, I do not teach them manipulation. Even the most intelligent parents, I find that I may not be able to teach them appropriately, and therefore I do not teach manipulation. I tell them, leave the child alone, come back to me when you're comfortable to come. If you're comfortable to come in the first week, 2 weeks, I'll start casting in 2 weeks. Is there a problem in the 1 month or 2 weeks? No, there is no problem. The goal is to get the child's foot corrected in the early phases before the child is beginning to stand or using his foot weight bearing on the ground. So if you look at the time frame for correction, it is 5 or 6 casts, 5 weeks. 3 weeks for the tenotomy, post-tenotomy cast, 8 weeks. And then you have 3 months of 23 hours of bracing, which means 2 months, 3 months almost, plus 3 months, which means 6. By the time the child is beginning to stand, which is usually 8 months, the foot should be corrected. So it's not a tearing hurry to go in for the first day. You start manipulating right on the first day. No, you can wait, comfortable. Traditional reasons, many Indian families, they don't come out of the house before the child is 2 weeks old or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. Depending on traditions, you can do that and start casting as early as possible. Yes, but not soon in the incubator period. No.
I have here an observation. I completely agree with you in your situation. I guess this makes sense. But as we have all the babies in the clinic with the clubfoot, and we see it mostly before the birth and directly after the birth, so exactly we can inform the parents before or the day after. But our observation is, if you can start the treatment in the first 2-3 days, the soft tissue, everything is smoother. Why? Then the baby is still under the hormone of the mother, who makes the symphysis weak. But this influence after 5, 6, 2 weeks goes away, and all the structure gets more rigid. So in our house, we profit from this smooth, soft tissue and tendon under the influence of the hormones from the mother, from the birth.
Yeah. So, not that if a child wants a cast at 1 week, yes, we will do it. If they are coming to me, I'll put the cast right in the first week. But the protocol that they follow, most of the time they come at a certain time. But I don't do it in the incubator, no.
No.
Thank you. So we move on to the next question. The next question is addressed to Dr. Slongo. The question is, the patient is put on a synthetic cast instead of plaster of Paris in the management of clubfoot. Is there any benefit in the duration of therapy or the number of casts required for the patient?
That's a good question. Again, I make this now, and I was the first in the world who started this, and the company made an also video about this. It's more than 30 years now. So there are different points. In the plaster of Paris, you cannot form the foot over the length or give him a tension inside, because the plaster of Paris, you can give only punctional pressure, and it gets very hard. And once it's hard and you try to manipulate, then it breaks. The advantage of the soft cast is that during the process getting hard, you can manipulate. This is a dynamic manipulation. This is a huge advantage, I can tell you. Second part is the soft cast needs less padding, so you have more direct contact to the foot. The third part is removal is much easier. The parents can unroll the bandage at home and then come back. The baby takes a bath, come back, physiotherapy back to me. And at the end, if you see all this, the cost will not so much higher. So these are the points why we changed to soft cast. But for me, the clinical result, since I'm using this, is in a shorter time, in a better.
Thank you, Dr. Slonko. Any comments from the rest of the panel to this question? Dr. Rimadi, you have anything to add to this question?
I prefer to use plaster of Paris for only one reason. Our patients are coming from interior, not from the city, especially those coming from villages who may not have means of communications available handy. So plaster of Paris is a plaster that can be removed at home easily. That's a big advantage for doing it. Apart from that, we have been using Articast or soft rubber, especially to reinforce the post-anatomy casts or the ones who are, the elderly boys or girls who are requiring casts and they want to move around and then the cast might break.
No, this is a very important point, but it's a wrong point. Everybody believes this. Our experience, and we have a good feedback from the parents who knows both, and we ask our nurse always to the parents, the soft cast, removal of the soft cast in a critical situation at home is 10 times easier than a normal plaster of Paris. The plaster of Paris in water to cut it off. No, the soft cast, you can remove it much easier, no dirty. So the parents convince this that they feel it much more safer and it's easier to remove it. And before I started with soft cast, I did 20 years plaster of Paris, so I have both experience, so I can compare.
Yeah.
It's not only, so this is my advantage. I say not always Rolls-Royce car is better than Bentley cars. I have not one or other. But I was treating plaster of Paris over 20 years. And not only this, I give courses for plaster casting. And then when the new material came out, I said, okay, for me, this has an advantage. It's the same like this, all of you have a smartphone. Why you have a smartphone? Because it's more modern, has more safety undone. And this is, and we as surgeons, as always, we are thinking very conservative. Once we learn something, we have problem to open our mind for new things.
Yeah, so plaster of Paris also we use the technique, we hold the edges and then they unroll the plaster. So it's a tide between what the regional differences and demands and I agree.
Not the religion. It's not the religion.
No, region, geographic region.
But it's not the religion.
No, not at all. It's the region, geographic regions. Yeah. Do you have any?
Varghese, you wanted to add some comments? Dr. Varghese?
Cost factor is an important thing here because in many of the public institutions, we can't even get the ready-made plaster. You have to make it in-house. So are there.
Okay. So in the interest of time, we move on to the last question. This question is addressed to Dr. Sunil. The question is from Dr. Vikas Basa. His question is, in the management of DDH, how often do we do ultrasonogram once a child is in Pavlik harness? And there's a follow-up question to that. If we do a repeat ultrasonogram, do we do it with Pavlik harness or without Pavlik harness?
Okay. So but the protocol that I follow is at birth, when I see a child with unstable hip, either ortholan is positive or Barlow's positive, and then clinical diagnosis is supplemented by ultrasonography. And then mainly, as I mentioned, I go for alpha angle, percentage of femoral head within the acetabulum, as well as the stability, that is dynamic ultrasonography. And then I put the child on Pavlik harness with the additional security using that nappies in the center. And then once you put to that, and then see the child again with ultrasonography to see whether hips are located or hips are stable in that position. I mean, I wouldn't say it is stable, whether hips are deeply seated in the socket. And then next ultrasonography is in another 2 weeks' time. Of course, there is the thing called the improving acetabular index with time. So that's we call the acetabular remodeling. And then next, at the end of the 2 weeks, if it is stable in the position, then at the end of another 1 month. So altogether at the end of 6 weeks, a repeat scan to see whether it is in the same position. And most of the children that I see, and these hips become stabilized by the end of 6 weeks. That is my experience. And then I have not published it yet, but most of the children, about 98% of these children who are locatable very nicely with the harness, and then 2 weeks scan is good. At the end of 6 weeks, they become stable. And then once it is become stable and then in addition to stability, their alpha angles become close to 60 degrees, 58 or 60. And then I continue the harness for additional 1 month to be on the safe side, and then remove the harness. So that is the protocol I follow. And then at the end of 6 months, I take an X-ray in these children to make sure that hips are in place and to see the development of the femoral ossific nucleus.
Thank you, Dr. Jayasinghe. Dr. Slango, please go ahead.
As I mentioned before and have shown in my presentation, it's the same as we heard before. First ultrasound with pathology, then treatment starter, perhaps with 2 weeks of life. Then next ultrasound for control after 4 weeks. Our sequence is always 4 weeks. Then after 4 weeks again, and normally if you can start a type 3 hip in the second week of life, after 8 weeks, at least after 12 weeks, we have a normalization of the hip. So then we stop the treatment and the control. And in contrast to the comment before, the first real X-ray is made for see how the hip looks with 24 months when the child is walking. Because when I have the last sonography with week 8 or 10, and this sonography shows me normal values, then I'm sure I'm waiting up to 20 months. Okay. Good. Fantastic.
Thank you, Dr. Slango. That brings us to the end of the program. So before we conclude the program, I would like to hear closing comments from the panelists, starting from Dr. Slango.
Okay, again, I learned a lot of my colleagues here from India. I guess we shared our experience, and especially I enjoy also the discussion we have mostly before we start with the presentation. And in this way, I hope also our delegates, and I don't know how many delegates we had, have enjoyed also this meeting, and I hope we can continue with this education.
Thank you, Dr. Slango. Dr. Varghese, can you have your closing comments?
Thank you. It was indeed a learning experience from both sides, and therefore it was enjoyable. And the discussion, as Teddy mentioned, even before the session started, it was a very nice discussion we've had. And a message to the audience, both the techniques, whether for clubfoot or DDH, detail that is important. We have to get the details right. For the casting technique, the detail is very important. And for the DDH, early recognition and decision making what to do is important. So both are birth defects which need an attention to detailing, and that must not be forgotten.
Perfect.
Dr. Vijayasinghe, your closing comments?
Yeah, I mean, the most important things are mentioned by two senior most colleagues, actually. And this education, the way that we are educating is completely changed by the advent of COVID-19. I think now these webinars are very important for everyone to learn from home and everyone to share our knowledge from home. I think this is a great opportunity for everyone, and it is a chance to share knowledge from all over the world. Thank you very much for organizing this.
Thank you.
Dr. Vijay Singh. Dr. Nimade, your closing comments.
Thank you, SCT. And thank you, our three senior panelists. Just like I mentioned, we have 100 years of experience here between 2 hours now. And I'm sure what they have shared with us is the extract of what you actually need when you start treating this patients. Learn, get the details right, and only then practice on the patients. Don't mess up, because you will end up into more problems. And I'm sure they are always open for discussions. We can share with them, we can learn from their techniques. And as we have learned, it is important that we keep our mind open. There are more than one ways of doing one particular thing. Everyone is right, because they have their own proven results. So I look forward to learn from Dr. Slongo on their traction techniques and other things. And I thank Dr. Matthew Verghese for teaching me the clubfoot casting, after which we started our clubfoot clinic at Lata Mangeshkar Hospital. And I'm happy to share that our clinic is the second rank in Maharashtra in number of clubfoots treated in last 5 to 6 years. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Sunil sir, for sharing your experiences on DDH as well.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Nimade.
Thank
On
you.
behalf of yes, Dr. Slongo.
Only if anyone of the delegates has a question, I'm always willing to answer an email. If you send me an email, a crazy case, I will always answer it nearly 100%.
Thank you very much.
Sure, Dr. Slongo. We'll forward the questions. Sure.
That's a great resource. Thank you very much.
Bye.
So thank you, everyone. On behalf of SCT and AO Alliance, I would like to thank all the panelists and also the participants for making this a great learning experience. A couple of announcements before we leave. I would request the participants to share their feedback and also share their queries so that we can forward them to the faculty. And the email ID which is mentioned on the bottom of the web page can be addressed to. And if any of your colleagues or team members could not access this particular live webinar, they can actually access it through the same web link for the next 1 month, and they can rewatch the webinar. And after 1 month, we are planning to include all the webinars, all the live telecasts, recorded versions, on a single web page, and that web page will be shared with all the participants on their registered email ID. So this concludes not only this program, but also the entire live webinar series on advances in casting and splinting, which actually started on May 16th and happened every week on a Saturday. And this webinar series has seen the participation of more than 3,000 orthopedic surgeons, mostly from India and the subcontinent, who have shown immense commitment and learning attitude by posting their questions and also sharing their feedback about the program. We are very much thankful for it. And apart from participants, we also be thankful to the faculty, whoever from India, the subcontinent, and also from Europe, who have shared their diverse clinical experiences and best practices to the participants, especially on the non-operative orthopedic care. So I would like to thank all the speakers and the panelists who have been part of this live webinar series since May 16th. And of course, all this could not have been possible without the intense support from AO. So I would like to thank especially the faculty of AO Trauma and AO Alliance, who have given their immense valuable time, insights, and commitment, ensuring a high-quality webinar series. So we hope to stay connected with all the participants of this entire live webinar series, and we'll keep you updated on our future educational programs, especially in non-operative orthopedic care. So thank you once again, everyone, and please stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.